Good morning, church. It's good to see you this morning. Good to see you guys smiling, enjoying the day as we celebrate Good Friday today. As Pastor Gerhardt mentioned earlier, for us it is good, but for Christ it was a time of suffering, pain, and death. But what we gained through that is undescribable and something that we cannot even begin to put into words. You know, I got to share a little bit here this morning as these kids sang their special number. Beautiful special number. And you got to love the honesty of the kids, right? And I'm going to pick on some of them because when they come into my youth program or our youth program, they're going to get picked on even more. But I love watching these little kids in just how genuine and how honest they are even up here on stage. You have the little girl that's checking out her flower. You know, she's loving it, wants everybody to notice her pretty dress. Then you have the little girl that's waving at mom and dad. Hi, mom. Hi, dad. And you got the little boy over here that just isn't going to have no part of it. It's like, get me off of the stage. I'm done. I'm over it. Let's move on to the next thing. But you got to love the honesty of the kids. Where their heart is at and how they worship. And they're genuine about it. And that's what I love about watching these kids whenever they do songs or they do programs, that they are who they are. And we may have some things to learn from them. And anyway, and then moving on to our worship team, just beautiful time of worship. You know, that first song that we sang, Breakthrough, will probably wrap up majority of what my message is going to be talking about today and the direction that I'm kind of wanting it to go this morning. But would you bow with me in opening prayer this morning? God, again, we come before you and we are just grateful for this day that you have set aside. Lord, a day of us remembering of you going to the cross and paying for my sin, paying for our sins. And God, a price that we ourselves could never pay. But you were willing. And because of that, we are here today to worship you and to praise you. And I just ask that as we go into the time of study this morning, that you just guide me. And the words that I speak will be words that will bring you honor and glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. This morning I'm going to start my message out with 3 words. And I'm also going to end it with 3 words. And they are the 3 final words that Jesus spoke before he died upon the cross. In John chapter 19, verse 30, when he had received the drink, Jesus replied, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. 3 words that Jesus spoke that we could say that he spoke so little, but yet had so much power. When you think of the term or the word finished, what comes to mind? It means that the work that has been set before us is complete, right? That the work that we have been set out to do is done. Whenever we think of guys that are doing construction, whether it's metal buildings, house reconstruction, or new models, whenever they say that it is finished, what does that mean? That means that the job that they had started is complete. The job that they had been given to do has been finished. The house is ready to be moved into. The shop is ready to be used. When a driver delivers a load, when he starts, it is only the beginning of the process. He has to secure the load. He has to make sure that the load stays on the trailer. And then he has to work his way through traffic. And when he finally gets that load to its destination and it is unloaded, all the equipment is put away, he says the load is finished. That means that it is complete. The load is done. And the same way it is in our lives in a lot of areas whenever we say that it is finished. It means that there is nothing else that needs to be done for the work that has been given to us, nothing that needs to be added to it. It has been complete. And when I looked at these words of Jesus that He says, "It is finished," He knows that Satan has been defeated. When Jesus said, "It is finished," from the time that He came on this earth as a baby, and as He began to grow, and as He began to worship in the temple, and as He stayed there whenever He was 12 years of age and His parents had to come back to Him, as He began to teach His disciples, He began to call them. There were some that were fishermen, some that were carpenters, some that were doctors. He called every one of them to come and follow Him, and He would make them, as the fishermen, He would make them fishers of men. And as He began to train these young men, He started out His ministry. And He went about the different towns and the different communities, teaching them to follow Him, to worship Him, and to get others to follow Him. And we know that even during that time, Christ often went by Himself to pray. So not only did He guide His disciples and teach them, He taught us as well. He taught us that in times of busyness that we ourselves often need to withdraw and we need to pray. We need to pray for ourselves. You know, I think so many times we get so caught up in trying to help everybody else that we tend to forget about ourselves. But Jesus taught us that we needed to pray for ourselves as well. And so as you read throughout the New Testament, you often read where Jesus withdrew from the crowds and He spent time by Himself and prayed. Jesus taught us how to forgive. He taught us how to love. He taught us how to respect. In the short 3 years that Jesus taught on this earth, He taught us many things, and they've all been recorded here in the Bible for us. And so when Jesus says that it is finished, there is nothing else for Him to do upon this earth, because the job that God had sent Him to do is complete. The job that God had given Him to do, there is nothing else that needs to be added to it. Now, as I work up to the latter part of my message here, I want to go back into Luke, where Jake had left off here on Sunday with us, as it was the Passover and Jesus made the triumphal entry. We read that after Jesus had entered into Jerusalem in the book of Luke, chapter 19, that Jesus clears the temple in verse 45. I did a little bit of studying on this week a little bit as well, and I came across that during this week, or the week of Passover, that there were some 250,000 lambs that could have been slaughtered for the sacrifice, or that brought in for the sacrifice. So you think about the amount of animals that had to be sacrificed for the people's sins. And Jesus took all that upon Him, and He became the sacrificial lamb. But anyway, as Jesus goes on throughout His week, He begins to teach as well. He clears the temple. And the next part that I want to focus on a little bit is the Last Supper. Something that we're going to take part of today after the service. This is the night before Jesus gets crucified, or the last day before Jesus gets crucified. In Luke chapter 22, and it starts in verse 7. It says that it came up to the town, and He gives His disciples specific instruction on where to go and find the preparations for the Passover meal. Then Jesus asked them if they want Him to prepare it. And He says that as you enter a city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. So anyway, they went and they found the things that just as Jesus had told them once again. Then in verse 15, He said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. Now, Jesus says here that He has eagerly desired. This means that it is something that He has looked forward to. It is something that He has anticipated. He has trained these young men to walk with Him, to be His disciples, to be the followers of Him. And He says that this is something that I want to do with you. And it is the same thing that Christ wants to do with us today after the service. He says to us as a church, as a body of believers, that I have eagerly desired to eat this with you, to eat this Passover meal with you. So He says here in verse 17, after taking the cup, He gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you, for I tell you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom comes." And then He took the bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In verse 20, the same way, after the supper, He took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." And then He goes on to talk about the one who will betray Him. And He says that woe to him who betrays Him. He wished that he probably would have never been born. And so, as we think about the Last Supper, and as we prepare to take communion this afternoon or right after the service, it is something that Jesus has eagerly desired to do with us and continues to do. He also tells us that do this in remembrance of me. Paul records it later on in Corinthians. That this is something that we are to do in remembrance of Christ, of what He has done for us, the price that He has paid for us. Because you remember whenever He says in John chapter 19, He says, "It is finished." There is nothing more that we need to add to the elements that have been prepared for us. There is nothing more that we can do to make ourselves more worthy of taking communion. But I think so many times that we feel unworthy of it. That we feel as though that maybe I shouldn't. Maybe it's not for me. Well, why did Peter take communion, right? Why did Peter eat that Last Supper with Him? Because as you read later on into the verses there, in verse 33, Peter replies to Jesus, "But he replied, 'Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death.' Jesus answered, 'I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times that you know me.'" So whenever we come here this morning and we know that we are going to take communion, do we come eagerly desiring to worship with God, to eat this with our Savior? Do we take it like Peter, but yet we are bold in our faith and we want to do so much for Him, but yet we're reminded that before the rooster crows 3 times, we will disown Him? You know, wouldn't you like it if Jesus just gave you a clear sign like that? That, Johnny, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. Corny, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. Wouldn't it be nice if Jesus just gave us a clear indication like that? Well, He does. And so many times we are like Peter. We get among the crowds. We get among the people. And we forget who it is that we serve, or we get caught up in the moment and we deny Him. And so we become like Peter and we deny Him. And then we become like Peter and then we go out and it says that he wept bitterly after he had denied Him 3 times. Because he realized the statement that Christ had made and what had just happened. And in doing so, we often find ourselves unworthy of coming to Christ. Not just before communion, not just on Good Friday, not just on Sunday morning, but during the week. We feel ourselves so unworthy of coming to Christ. And we think that I don't belong. I don't fit in. How could Jesus love me? I want to share a point or two of what Ike had shared with us here at Leadership Retreat. And one of the first things that he did after the first session that he taught, he had us all go our separate way, get in our own little spot in the sanctuary or around the building, wherever it was. And he asked us a question. Ask God, how are we doing? How is your relationship with God? And when you come before God and you ask Him this, what is it that you hear? What is it that God tells you? Do we hear guilt? Do we hear condemnation? Do we hear shame? Or do you come to God and do you hear, I love you? I love you, Johnny. I love you, Frank. I think so many times we're like Peter that we want to be bold in our faith, and yet we fall short. And then we begin to criticize ourselves and we feel unworthy. That we disown Christ as Peter did, and we weep bitterly. We are in remorse of our sins. But yet when we come to God, He embraces us. And He says that you're forgiven. He says, I love you. He says, I want to share this meal with you. And as we go about our week and as we go about our day, we oftentimes wonder, how could a God love an individual like me? But how do you view the Father's love towards you? Do you come to God seeking tenderness? Or are you tense? Are you worked up over what the outcome is going to be? Or what He is going to say? We know that later on, after Jesus is resurrected and He comes back to His disciples, He reinstates Peter. And He meets Peter there on the lakeside, on the shore there. And He asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? Feed my sheep. And the 3rd time Peter replies, Lord, you know I love you. And that is the same response that Jesus has for us. He comes to us and He tells us that He loves us. That He wants to eat with us. He wants to spend time with us. But there are so many times that we try to do so much to earn that love, to earn that respect, to earn God's favor. We work so hard, we push ourselves so hard. We try to be involved in so many places, try to do so much. And it's as if though we are wanting Christ to approve all the works that we're doing. And He simply says, just come. Just sit with me. And that may be something that some of us need to do this morning, is just to come and to sit with Him this morning. And to listen to what He has to say to us about who we are in His eyes. Not who I think I am in His eyes, but what He thinks of me through His eyes. Pete, you're my son. I love you. You're forgiven. And as we prepare to take communion this morning as well, I just want you guys to remember that it doesn't matter what you've done. Christ died for all. Christ came so that everyone could have life, that whoever believes in Him will not perish but have everlasting life. And so as Jesus hung there on the cross, all the sins were put upon Him. And in His last words, He says, it is finished. So as we started the message this morning in saying that it is finished, the work that Christ came to do, it is finished upon the cross today. That Christ came to show us how to love. He showed us how to encourage. He showed us how to care. But when Christ said, it is finished, it is also an end to all of the guilt, all of the shame, all of the condemnation that we put upon ourselves, because He loves each and every one of us. And He has no greater desire than to eat this last meal with Him. So just as a reminder in closing here, that when Christ said, "It is finished," remember that it is finished. Amen.